So whether or not you need nutritional supplements or not is going to be down to a number of different factors. So the first question to ask is, how nutrient dense is your diet at the moment? How able are you to get all the essential vitamins and minerals from the food that you're eating? Even if you're managing a pretty good diet, one thing to consider is that modern farming methods, which typically seek to maximize yield at the expense of nutrient content, might actually be having an impact. We certainly know that the level of minerals available now in produce is lower than it was several years ago. And processing of food also typically tends to strip ingredients of critical nutrients. The type of diet you also have is another key factor to consider. If you're a vegan, you will need to supplement with B12 because that is only available in animal products. Equally, if your diet isn't incredibly well managed as a vegan, you may also find that you have relatively low levels of minerals such as iron, iodine, and calcium and zinc can be harder to come by from purely plant food diets. If you are also avoiding certain foods because of intolerances or allergies, then again, depending on how well you're able to manage your diet as a whole, that may also mean that you need certain supplements. So if you're someone who, for example, avoids gluten, it might be a problem depending on what you are replacing those gluten-containing products with in terms of B vitamins, for example. Your lifestyle will also have an impact on whether you may or may not need supplements. So if you are someone who's very active, or you have exposure to a lot of stress or environmental pollutions, that might increase your need for nutrients because of the challenge that you are putting to your body. If you're on medications, including things like birth control, it might also mean that you have a higher need for nutrients. If you typically perhaps drink quite a lot of alcohol, that will also have an impact on the nutrients that your body needs to deal with that, as well as all the other things that it's trying to keep in balance. Your age will also have a role to play, because once we get to the age of 50 and above, it's actually much harder for the body to actually absorb nutrients. So we might need to think about the level that we're taking in order for the body still to get the optimal amount that it requires. And the final consideration might also be to do with your genetics. So if you've had any particular testing, you might know that for you personally, you have a much higher need for particular nutrients because of the way that your body operates, the efficiency of certain systems or processes. So if you have that information, that will also give you insight in terms of whether a nutritional supplement might be something that you need to consider. So if you were considering taking supplements, what's a good basic protocol? Well, first thing to think about would be a good multivitamin and mineral, which is a great way to get a wide range of the nutrients you need in one hit. And so things to look out for here would be a well-formulated supplement that contains all of your important vitamins. So you're looking for A, C, D and E, as well as the B vitamins, and some of your really essential minerals, including things like copper and manganese. Now, things like calcium and magnesium will be in smaller quantities because the amount you need would make an enormous pill, which would be virtually impossible to swallow as part of a multi-formulation. But a well-formulated or more expansive version would also include vitamin K, and might also have some additional minerals, things like boron, selenium and molybdenum. And so what we need to look out for is some of the forms that are included in these types of formulation. So when we're looking for type of vitamin D, it's useful to look for D3. And it's also important to look for what's called methylated versions of B9, which is also known as folate, and also B12, because they are much more effective in the body in those forms. The next part of a basic protocol that you'd probably like to consider is an omega-3 supplement. So this would include the essential fatty acids called EPA and DHA, which are really important to the body because of their anti-inflammatory activity. This would be particularly important if you were someone that didn't eat oily fish or grass-fed meat, because the precursors that we can have from plant foods are actually very poorly converted by the body. So if you're on a vegan or a vegetarian diet, it is harder to get these forms of essential fatty acid. And a supplement here, you'd be looking at either a fish or a krill oil rather than cod liver oil. And what you'd be thinking about in particular in choosing a product here would be one where the manufacturer has guarantees in relation to the chemical stability over time of the formula, and also the purity of the oil and lack of contamination with heavy metals, for example, like mercury. Unfortunately, due to these levels within the oceans, a lot of larger fish, such as tuna, are now known to contain quite high levels of these heavy metals. So you'd definitely want something that gave guarantees in that territory. And you'd be also looking for quite a large amount of EPA and DHA, so 50% and upwards of the total oil content. So looking for smaller amounts of other parts of the oil that might not have the same beneficial properties. These aren't suitable if you are someone who is a haemophiliac or you're on anticoagulant medication like warfarin. And the third thing that we might want to think about when it comes to a basic protocol would be a probiotic. So this is a live form of beneficial bacteria, which you can get from certain fermented food and drinks, but if you don't include those in your diet regularly, you might also want to consider a supplement which would provide a number of different strains of bacteria because of the importance of them to our gut health and the knock-on effect that has in our overall health. When it comes to thinking about a probiotic, a few things to bear in mind here would be, firstly, picking one that has a number of different strains, so 6 or more, so we're not just taking in one particular type of bacteria, and also one that gives reassurance in terms of the number of bacteria that are contained in a way that gets to the intestines where they're required in a live form. You also want to think about how these products are produced if you have restrictions in your diet. So vegans in particular might need to choose very carefully because a lot of these products are based on milk in terms of how the bacteria are grown and produced. Also, a probiotic wouldn't be suitable if you were pregnant at the moment, if you're someone who's had surgery recently, or you have another reason by which your immune system might be compromised. Beyond a basic protocol, if you were thinking about a more tailored regime, then probably the best thing to do is to seek the advice of a qualified practitioner or to undertake some specific testing that will help you to see whether there's anything that for you personally might be important beyond that basic protocol. So a few things to watch for if you are considering taking supplements. The first is that you should always seek advice if you're on a particular type of medication, because there might be interactions that either make it less or more effective, or particular side effects that you might experience. The other thing to be aware of is if you are pregnant or breastfeeding, you should pick supplements that are appropriate for those situations, because there will be some differences that you'll need to pay attention to at those times. You also need to check for what's called good manufacturing process guarantees from the manufacturers of the products that you choose, because this basically provides some reassurance around the quality, both in terms of the production process, but also the end product. And if you do have dietary restrictions because you have a sensitivity or an allergy, for example, to gluten or to dairy, you need to look carefully at the list of ingredients. And equally, if you have preferences in terms of a plant-based diet, then again, you will need to choose carefully to make sure that the products have been approved as appropriate for vegans. You'll need to be mindful of the time of day when you take supplements. So some, for example, like omega-3, are much better taken with food, whereas others, like probiotics, are actually better taken on an empty stomach. So actually a better chance of those bacteria getting to the intestines where they're needed if there is not food in the way in the digestive system at the time. It's also really important, if you've not taken supplements before, to build up slowly. So to start gradually and then check that you're not suffering any side effects and start to build up from there. And obviously it's really important that you stop immediately if you do experience any kind of adverse effects, unless you're under the supervision of a qualified practitioner who can guide you in terms of whether those things might be very short-lived or they are a more serious indication of something, which would mean you need to refrain. It's also really important that you don't exceed what's called the safe upper levels. And these are basically the limits that we know are safe for the long-term intake of both minerals and vitamins. So mega doses should always be avoided unless you are under the supervision of a qualified practitioner, or you've had specific testing which has revealed a particular need or a deficiency, which normally will be fairly short term, which would require you to go over and above what would be considered a normal dose. And the last thing to watch for, if you are going to buy in bulk particularly, is that you look for use by dates and freshness seals, which would be important in making sure that those supplements still contained the right level of nutrients and the quality of nutrient. So quite a lot to take in there to make sure that what we're doing with supplements is supportive and helpful and isn't going to adversely affect our health in any way. So as a reminder of all of that, there is a sheet that you can download called Supplement Do's and Don'ts, and it's got everything you'll need to make sure that you can stay on the right track.